everyone. Brian Barletti here from Sounds Profitable, and welcome to a new product deep dive. Today, I'm talking to our guest, Fisher Robison, a senior product manager at Veritone Voice. Fisher, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. You know, Veritone Voice is such a neat product, and I've had the chance to use it myself. And what's cool is you offer the self-serve aspect and the managed service aspect, and I haven't really tried out much of the self-serve. So you're going to walk us through a little bit of that today. But before we dig into that, could you tell us a little bit about what Veritone Voice is?
Yeah, so it's funny. I have some notes here because the Veritone Voice product, even probably since you onboarded as a customer / partner, has grown exponentially in that we essentially went from the one editor that I'm going to walk through today into now a platform. So I'm going to do my best to cover as much as I can without getting too long-winded. But to go back to your original question, Veritone Voice is our synthetic content creation platform. So that's both text to speech, speech to speech. We do some stuff on the avatar side as well, but that's not necessarily voice. And it's part of the AI, Veritone AIware ecosystem and premise of where, as synthetic content grows, we make it so that it's that you can access it through the platform. So whatever that underlying technology is, whatever's the most state of the art, all of that's accessible through Veritone Voice.
That's awesome. Yeah, the AIware as an operating system thing has always been interesting to me. It's so hard to grasp sometimes because we think of like iOS or Android or Windows or Mac, but the more time I've had a chance to spend with you and the team, the more I really get that that's the goal. I mean, this is to connect as many cool pieces of technology together as possible and really set you on a really cool path to do the most you can with all these different tools.
Yeah, one of the biggest things too, just not to go too deep, but as you can imagine, like the state of the art, especially in the machine learning space, I've worked at Veritone for 6.5 years. Every year, every 6 months, the kind of state of the art has changed. And so what we found working with the iHearts and the big names that I'm probably not supposed to go through all the names, but the big names of the world, they want the output, right?
Yeah.
Same with on the synthetic voice side. We're doing a lot on the translation side, which we'll get into. They don't necessarily care what that underlying machine learning model is, as long as it's the best. And so we've done that across the board for AI and machine learning for all of our different verticals. And it's really future-proofing our customers' investment into using cutting-edge tools, is building this abstraction layer so that they can just access it and get the most value out of it the fastest.
It's smart, right? Because that layer means that I'm integrated into that layer. And if technology changes, right, it's on you to make sure that that connection still works. I don't have to reintegrate each time. If something is a massive change, every publisher is still connected to you. It's your lift once for a new piece of software or new technology versus every client reintegrating from scratch. I think it's really smart.
Yeah, and the underlying premise of AIware was so that when we have to go make those changes, we can do it very rapidly.
That's great. And that's where we are tech-wise. I mean, I think it's why APIs have been such a big part of the future of technology and all these UIs are built off of an API, because when a publisher wants to be able to do their own thing or someone wants to be able to innovate rapidly, you don't want to rebuild the connection from start.
Exactly.
Well, Let's load up this screen share and let's dig into the platform. So what are we looking at right here?
Cool. So this is, for lack of a better term, like this is in today's, at least what's publicly released, in today's standpoint, this is the most tangible thing and tangible product that you're going to see from Veritone Voice. And when I say tangible, it's really that you just went into kind of a deep dive on APIs. Like we have a big API business that's not as tangible to everybody, right? So to consume and use text to speech and speech to speech today, the most tangible form is through this, what we're calling the voice editor. And so this is our editor application, but I'm just going to call it out now, and I'll say this a lot. Everything you see me go through in the editor is also exposable through the API to do things at scale.
That's great, because then I can build out my own flows instead of following along with what you built.
Exactly. So should I launch into it?
Yeah, let's dive right into it. So we're going to start with text to speech or speech to speech first.
Let's start with text to speech. It's all embedded into one. So So you'll see that as I go to create a clip. The one thing that we can call out is let me know when you want to go into how voices actually get into this application. And maybe it's once we're actually visualizing the voices, that's a good time to talk about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. So this application is very, very simple, which is in my mind, in the kind of way I think about software, that is the benefit here. The idea is not to keep you in the application all day. The idea is to allow you to easily come into the application, create your synthetic content, export it, or publish it to whatever output mechanisms you want. So you log in, you just have classic folder structure here. If I click into a folder, I have some existing clips created, and then you can launch right into clip creation. And so clip creation, this is where you kind of have the two different content classes. We call it in the UI, I call it modalities, where you have text to speech and speech to speech. If we go into text to speech, let's just do test 2, and I can create a clip, and then we'll go back to speech to speech. So text to speech launches you right into the editor. So there's a lot going on here, and basically in the middle of the screen is where you actually can input text. You could upload files as well. And then on the right-hand side, you have tons of different editing options. So if I just took a piece of text here, let's take this blog post, and I put it into the app. Obviously, it's going to on the paragraph breaks, it's going to separate it's going to be on a speaker level. And then that's all my text. You could just right away, you could preview this. A default synthetic voice gets applied to this. And so this is where it starts to go down the rabbit hole, essentially, is on the right-hand side, we have these editing options. And what this really drives from is the voices, right? And so when I continue to say, like, this is an abstraction layer across all the different technology out there right now, that's exactly how Veritone's designed. So we have hundreds of different stock voices across hundreds of different languages and dialects that are stock. So anybody can use them. If you wanted to create a show and it was you talking to a synthetic Amber, you could actually create some super unique content where that person talking back to you is just a stock voice. But beyond that, where we really are focused right now, and you can see that through our Vocal ID acquisition, is this concept of custom voices. So being able to I use Ryan Steelberg, who's our president and founder, but there's many recognizable names who have been trained that I can't demo. But as you can imagine, taking a known personality like Brian Barletta and extending that voice out synthetically is something that we are super focused on.
Well, let's talk about that for a second with the voices, right? So when you say stock voices, are they Veritone specific stock voices, or are they voices acquired through the partnerships that you have?
Both.
Okay.
So so I can touch on that too. And with speech to speech, we can talk through Respeecher as well, who are super awesome, and their technology is killer. So with text to speech, there's many vendors that we offer, including Microsoft, who Microsoft performs extremely high, in my opinion. Some of their stock and their custom voices are very high quality. But we intently acquired Vocal ID to really beef up, and we were very impressed by some of their technology. For people that are super in the know and really geek out on this stuff, a lot of the vendors across the space are derived off the same underlying base models. And so there's just different techniques to fine-tuning those models to get to the end state, which is less about the tech, and it's more, I want the most natural sounding voice, right? And so that most natural sounding voice the keyword there, natural, might be different depending on the domain. So if I have a sports announcer, or I have a person who's reading finance news, there's different techniques to get a good voice in that. And so using multiple vendors, including our own tech, is kind of the game there, is where we play super strong in certain points. Localization is going to be big for us. And then other vendors play super strong in other points. And so we don't, you just want the editor with all your voice options. You don't really want to have to go out and retrain your model against all these different vendors. But yeah, to go back to your question, this is a combination of both Veritone voices as well as vendor voices. And it's permissionable. So you could have it so that only your Veritone voices showed up, or only X vendor showed up.
But that's really great because that really leans into the AI-aware mindset, right? Of being that middle layer, that Veritone Voice is a subset as well of different voices that are available that are unique to Veritone, but that you're connecting to all these other vendors, that you're the
Yeah.
connection point and not always going to be the A to Z everything. You're facilitating the use of this technology when maybe there are tools different than your specific version of it that would be better for an execution.
Exactly. And a lot of that comes into that we have, this is just one application built on top of AI, where some
Yeah.
of the names I briefly mentioned, they already use a lot of different applications. And across those different applications, essentially now that's built into their workflow, right? And if they really want, they work with vendor X and they're like, you know what, we really like vendor X's voice, but we want to stay within our workflow because this basically, like, not to get too in the weeds, but when I create a clip here, you can consume this clip if you so chose from all of our other applications. That's kind of the point. Is like that's where the operating system analogy comes into play. This file can be used in all of our different applications, but they want vendor that they have a relationship with. We don't want that to be the breaking point. We want to make sure that we can accommodate the best in breed, whatever the customer ends up ultimately wanting.
That's great. And so the custom voices, let's touch on this for a second here. How do I get, like, I gave you guys my voice and
Mhm.
you made it into a synthetic voice. Ryan did that. You mentioned other voices in there. We'll take a quick stop and mention that you're pioneering, you're a leading voice in, funny to use voice there, in the ethical use of AI voices. So there's like contracts to sign, there's approval, there's the whole marketplace aspect of it. But when it comes down to it, how do you take my voice and synthesize it?
Yeah. So, real quick, just from technical details, we take 1 to 3 hours of content, highest quality content possible, and single speaker, blah blah blah. You guys could imagine, garbage in, garbage out. It applies here too. Ultimately, we want the highest quality content. Fortunately, Veritone does sit on tons of our customers' content, obviously, from our other lines of business. So, um, we also then have a double verification step. So it's a written consent and a verbal consent. And then once we have that written and verbal consent, we can work with our customers to either decide if we're going to use the existing data they already store in our platform, and obviously get sign off from them approving which content we're using, or they can just record 1 to 3 hours. Or, for example, you could take this podcast speaker separated and send that over to us.
And this is like once you create the synthetic voice, that's it, one time, right? All of the different languages and all the different dialects are derived from that one experience.
Yeah, exactly. So with speech to speech, it gets a little complicated, but we can touch on that in a sec. For
Yeah,
text to speech, I can take 1 to 3 hours of your English training data or your native training language, and then I can derive versions of your voice in like 14 in custom. It's like 14 languages right now.
that's awesome.
But that's with the English training data set. So then now you could go in and type, and you could speak natively as Brian Barletta speaking Spanish, right?
And that's in the editor now on this page here. That's the editor drop down, English United States. That's where you would select.
Yeah, so you could see all the different languages. If I selected one of these languages, then you could select, for example, if I have Ryan Steelberg here, I could have Ryan Steelberg Spanish also. And so that's all configurable depending on the account and the user. You provision the voices to that user in that account. So
That's
that,
awesome.
just tying that, I'll tie a bow on that piece real quick. That's been big for us too, which it seems nonchalant, but from a security standpoint, obviously, it's not just the consent and the consent part. It's also being a good guardian of your voice. So although it's accessible through this application, we lock it down to the exact person that you want to have access to it. And then all the clips that get exported have an inaudible watermark. So every clip can be traced back to coming out of Veritone Voice.
I love that. And I love, when you did the drop down, you had English, UK. Did you have Australian as well in there?
Yeah, here I can show. So I'm moving between apps because in
Yeah.
Stage I have some cooler stuff. That's what I wanted to go through. But let's go into my account here in Prod. So let's go to Spanish.
Well, even the accents, right, in English are really important. I had a great conversation with a team out in Australia who were talking about how the ads that are being run, even though the products are relevant in Australia, if they're coming from an English voice while the rest of the content was Australian, it can be incredibly off-putting. And so little things like this that allow flexibility and growth and kind of the next phase in localization or even contextualization for content is really powerful. I mean, instead of hiring multiple voice actors, you're able to get that one voice actor and do the voice to voice, as we're going to review a little bit here, or even the text to voice, and being able to create it in multiple different executions in the same language. It really makes a difference. People can really tell. I mean, I would definitely know if it was an Australian voice in an English podcast.
Yeah. The thing you're calling out to is kind of like my main premise of Veritone. So there's other product teams now that I alluded to spinning up on top of Veritone Voice that are building some really cool stuff in sports, some cool stuff in podcasting, and some cool stuff with some other tech companies. My main focus, though, is making sure that the voices are as high quality as possible and that they're as flexible as possible to become as natural. And so one of the biggest things, especially as you talk about localization, is exactly what you said. The dialect has to be right? Because people, especially if they think that if you tell them it's synthetic, they're already going to be extra critical on it.
Yeah.
But so we want to just, again, make sure that for any of our customers who are producing tons of content around the world in different, not just different countries, but even within, California, there's different parts of California that speak in different dialects. So as we can bring those models online, the goal is to just be completely flexible, whatever dialect you want it to be. If your Southern California car sales ad is read a specific way, we want to make sure that you have the right voice to do that.
That makes a big difference. I really like these nuances. We're starting to focus more and more on creative and the content in it, especially on the advertising side, which is a lot of my focus. But being able to make it unique is really important for the accessibility.
Yeah, my thing is, I know this could launch into a rabbit hole in its own, but when people ask me about the angle of synthetic voice, to me, it's not the replacement of voice.
No.
It's the extension. And that's where I go into that. I'm super interested personally in getting this in front of creators who can start to create super unique content as if they had 5 guests on their show.
Yeah.
Without bringing in the 5 guests.
Yeah, right? And like in this text to speech area here that we're looking at, I mean, and this is exciting for me, so I apologize that we derailed some of it. But like on the right-hand side, there's the break, pause, strength, right? There's the intonation. There's also all the different aspects of like how to identify the right way to say different words here. This is an instrument. Right? This is a new tool. This isn't something that you can just pass to a standard editor. There will become experts and people who are skilled in playing a synthetic voice, a text-to-speech voice, the same way you play a piano, the same way you have incredibly skilled like sound design and SFX people to really drive things home for different executions. This will be an evolution of that. This will be a subset of that for people to really build a career around.
Exactly. I don't want to dive too far into all the editor options because I know I tend to do that. I will play this though, if we want to just go through a quick example of why you would need the editing options, kind of to your point.
Welcome back to another installment of Adventures in AI. In part 3 of our Metaverse series, we talk with Veritone president and co-founder Ryan Steelberg.
So it's funny because this is Ryan Steelberg reading
an intro to himself.
Yeah, a blog written about him. But the big thing to point out there is people who have heard Ryan's voice. Like I said, I've worked for them for 7 years. It's definitely his voice, but synthesized, right? And the big thing though is that these synthetic voices, it sounds weird, but they have like their own personality. And so like Ryan's synthetic voice tends to read a little bit faster than he normally talks. And so knowing that, you want to have all these tools in your toolkit to be able to go in and be like, all right, like this paragraph is too fast. I want to slow it down. Or I wanted to add emphasis at the end of a word. Or I wanted to tell this synthetic engine to read a word differently, like spell out Veritone if it was like a call to action in an ad, right? And so really that's what all these different options do, is allow you to fine tune this piece of content if you so choose. Don't have to, but we want to make sure that the options are available there to you.
Well, I think it makes a difference. I think that that's a big thing I try and focus on with ad tech is that ad tech is a tool that enables people to become more efficient and more skilled and more successful at their job. It's not an answer. So running this through there, taking the standard export, that's where we're going to find people say, I knew it wasn't Ryan, but it sounded very close and convincing. And, some people will say that, some will miss it and say, oh, okay, it was really him. But the more you spend time at adapting it, the more you sell it, the more you make it really believable, the more you fine tune it and make it an actual unique thing.
Yeah, and the most interesting thing too is that's just raw, right? So that's me going in synthesizing Ryan. The second you put even ambient noise or an audio bed behind it, if you heard some of the ads, again, I don't know if I can play them, but like if you heard some of the ads mixed by people that are not, I'm a software guy, the audio people that have actually taken this tool and mixed spots with it, with the jingles and everything in it, you would never know. Like it's so embedded, right? And so again, it just depends on the use case though. There are even use cases where people want to use the older kind of TTS voices that are robotic and play into that piece. So again, to me, this is a content creation tool that you put it in the hands of artists and they're going to do a lot of really cool things with it.
And so this was all the text to speech, and we have all those features there. But the speech to speech is really interesting, right? And that's the idea that my voice as the person who's going to read the content, and then Ryan's voice as the skin that's laid over that, are both have to be synthesized. And then from there, I mean, again, this is like a great opportunity, right? We have celebrities that are able to identify like, hey, I consent to my voice being used this way. Hey, I'm very comfortable with the text and the script that they're going to use. I just honestly can't read 50 iterations in that ad, or I can't do, 100 different bedtime story endings for different variations, but go ahead and, dive into it. Go ahead and let someone who can sound like me dive into it. And I say sound like me because we did a demo where I read and we layered Evo's voice and James Cridland's voice over mine. And it was very funny because I don't do an English accent. So James sounded like a weird mashup between the two of us. And it sounded mostly like Evo, but there's still little traces of my Boston accent that would come out around like the ends of certain words that really sounded more like Evo was doing an impression of me than it was Evo's voice applied to mine.
Yeah, exactly. So speech to speech, we're very thankful and grateful right now. We partner with, Respeecher, who just is they're award winning. They're fantastic in the speech to speech space. The one thing I will say is that speech to speech, the underlying technology that I was kind of talking about earlier, is actually different from TTS, right? So you have two different ways to accomplish relatively the same task. But there are instances where, and we're doing some cool stuff on text to speech, but I keep teasing all these things, which I'm sure is annoying. But with speech to speech, as you could imagine, if I whisper, or if I'm like a soccer, here in the States, soccer, like a soccer announcer, I want to say, go, like way easier to do right now in speech to speech. I can just say, go, upload that file, and it's going to map one-to-one, essentially, the inflection and the emphasis on goal. And so use cases like that it's a no-brainer. You did bring up a good point, though, is that even then you still want as close of a voice as possible to the output, because it goes back to what I talked about in training. And this is, I'm a little jaded with machine learning. This is like across the board. It's like garbage in, garbage out with machine learning for every modality, not just synthetic content. And with speech to speech, you want to use as close as a voice as possible. But the big benefit there is you're not going into the editing options or having to come up with some heuristic around like the speed of your voice. You can just upload that file and it's going to map it to the output speaker.
Now, Respeecher, the partner you're working with, were they the ones who worked on Star Wars?
Yeah.
They worked on The Mandalorian. So when we had Luke Skywalker coming back, they were part of that project. Yeah.
And people should definitely go out and look these guys up. They have a lot of cool demos out there, and they're doing some really incredible stuff. In film, it really makes sense too. Like for text to speech, a lot of the engagements we're in right now are massive volume. So you just touched on it. We've done it with speech to speech too. But like if I'm taking podcasts and I'm putting them into 20 different languages, it makes more sense to go through a TTS pipeline, because you don't need people to read those, you don't need voiceover to reread those ones. But with produced like I'm trying to say studios and full feature films, with like automated dialogue replacement and the like, speech to speech is super incredible there too.
I mean, I love it. I mean, think about, I'm a big fan of animation, and I think animation has come a long way. There are some voices that we're going to want to prolong for a long time, right? Mark Hamill as the Joker is iconic on that end. And while some people can kind of sound like him as impressions, imagine paying that person who can do the impression of that and allowing them to have Mark Hamill's voice layered on top of that. Right? How powerful will that be that we can keep that voice and mindset forever if we choose to, if that's the creative direction we want to take, but we can hire additional actors to do that. We can have the same voice between a movie and a TV show and a video game, where the actor is appropriately getting compensating for their voice, but they don't necessarily have to be back in the studio. They can lend their voice literally to someone else who can use it with their permission and them getting compensated to keep that same feel. I think it allows celebrities, it allows people who have, their own IP, their own brand, to continue to earn off of that, while empowering another group of people that are voice actors, people that have that skill in imitating sound, to get more work.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing I'll touch on too is like brand continuity is huge for us. I think people have been in certain dimensions, especially translation, there's been limitations on you speaking that language. I'm kind of changing gears a little bit, but you speaking that language. And so for us, like a lot of the people we've talked to, brand continuity is continually important to them. So that's an avenue as well. Real quick, just to wrap this up, because the application is very, like I said, it's very straightforward. For speech to speech, you literally just upload the file here, and that would be the source file. So let's say I wanted my voice to go. Bob is the, shout out to Bob. He's the engineer, kind of engineering lead behind all voice, and he's really redesigned everything and made it super awesome. But if I wanted my voice to go to his, I have to upload a file of my voice. I just hit process clip, and there's not going to be an editor or anything. It just generates you back an audio file that's going to show up in your table.
Because all the tone and the speed is there in the file that you uploaded, but both of those people have to be mapped. You and Bob have to have been mapped and processed for synthetic voice, for the text to speech, to then be able to do the speech to speech, right?
Yeah, that's a good call out. So it's not just like a voice modulation where my voice is going through a filter and coming to sound like Bob. Bob and I both submitted content, like an hour to 3 hours of content, and we were trained as a pair. So that's how we get the highest quality output, is by doing that training as a pair.
Awesome. Well, I mean, this was really great. I mean, being able to see how this tool works is honestly awesome. It's so nice to know that it's so accessible. I probably should dig into it a little myself with the translation and the synthetic voice for the Sounds Profitable stuff. But knowing that it's easy kind of makes me feel a little bit better that we're not passing off a lot of work over to the team. I mean, I love it, right? I think that Sounds Profitable is not a massive property by any means. We only get 300 to 400 downloads per episode of our show, and we're getting about 100 and change downloads to the Spanish content.
Oh, nice.
To me, right? That's 25% of the English audience is also listening in Spanish. And to me, the reason I did it was to show that a company of our size can do this. And I know Veritone is putting a lot of effort into making this more accessible. The price when this technology really started to hit the ground a few years back was very high. And even over the last 12 to 18 months with talking with your team, it's become very clear that this is going to become more and more accessible, because the goal here is to make our content reach everywhere, right? And to create new ways to build content. We're seeing the expansion of virtual reality spaces. We're seeing the idea of people moving to avatars and other resources like that. You could create content without ever being on the screen or ever having your voice do anything, and it still be more than text, and really have fun with it. And so honestly, I'm just really excited to see what Veritone's doing in this space and what's next.
Yeah, and the exciting thing is the simplification in my mind, right? It's like, I don't want to build something where you have to spend all this time. I want it to be seamless, so that you have an idea in your head and you can express it. There's even the opportunity, right? Like the avatar stuff is super interesting too, because it's like your voice is your power. So use your voice. You don't have to use the text to speech. We're working on an avatar offering as well, right? And it's like everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. And so we want to just make sure that there's all these different tools as the cutting edge. There's obviously a ton going on with stable diffusion and the Dolly and all the different all the different generative models coming out there. And it's just, again, there's a proliferation of machine learning into the creative space. And we want to make it as accessible to everybody as possible.
I think that's great. And so if you're interested in learning more about Veritone Voice, you can go to veritone.com/voice and find out more. I definitely recommend reaching out to you. Even as soon as we launch this deep dive and you take a look at it, there might be changes, there might be new iterations, there might be new prices. So what I recommend is always reaching out to them, always talking to them about it, figuring out what works for you with their products, and give them the opportunity to win over your business, because this makes a difference. While, not that many people are listening in Spanish for Sounds Profitable, in the grand scheme of things, a good chunk of my audience listens to it in Spanish. And that means that there is a new audience that I'm getting in touch with, or there are more people that I'm hopefully making feel a little bit more comfortable, and more companies that I'm showing that this is incredibly accessible. So, Fishers, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for letting me walk through all this and kind of geek out, Brian. Appreciate it.